Hey guys, what's going on? So I have a few things that I'm going to cover about election integrity, some things that are going on with the ballot machines in various places, particularly Philadelphia and their satellite election offices. But before we did that, I wanted to at least address the elephant in the room. DT supposedly has the CV. That's all I'm going to say about that at this time, because I'm the type of person that likes to wait, reserve judgment, and see how things play out. But rest assured, I'm keeping a close eye on it, and I'll make a couple of episodes about what I think is going down. In the meantime, I can safely say, all the world is a stage. So, you've heard me say many, many times that one of the things that Trump tends to do is mention things kind of nonchalantly, drops a small red pill, which turns out to be gigantic and later on true. I've seen the pattern over and over again, so when he mentioned Philly specifically in the debate, I went and I looked. I made the episode just recently about the Trump supporter that was kicked out of the satellite election offices. The reason why they were saying that she could not come in is because they're not polling places. This is not where you go and cast a ballot. That's what they were saying, because the state law only applies to actual polling stations. Which, of course, the state law hasn't been updated yet because Philly just created these. It sounds like intentional misdirection. So we have the stuff that I went over yesterday, and now there's a couple of things that I want to cover in this article too after looking into it a little bit more. Article from the Inquirer detailing the early voting that's gone on at these satellite election stations, as they call them. And it says that it got off to a rocky start. The day that they opened it, they only opened the first 7 of 15 of these satellite facilities that are unable to be watched by anybody, they say. But right here is a quote by Philadelphia Board of City Commissioners. Lisa Deely, who's the chair of the Philadelphia Board of City Commissioners, says it's a mail-in vote without having to use the mail. So a mail-in vote without having to use the mail. So it's not an in-person vote, because if you called it an in-person vote, then that would be a polling station and people could observe it. It's a satellite voting center, not a polling station, and you don't vote in person, you vote through the mail without having to use the mail. And the day that they opened it, they had problems. County election officials across Pennsylvania said that the state's voter database, known as SURE, was down throughout the morning. They regularly complain that the system, put in place in the early 2000s and run by the Pennsylvania Department of State, often goes offline or slows down, especially under heavy traffic. So they've created all these new satellite stations, and they're using the same old software to run them. Quote, "This is the first time that anything like this has been attempted in the city of Philadelphia, and it's the largest setup in the state of Pennsylvania. It's running on an older infrastructure, and we are asking for patience as we work out the initial complications." Does that sound like a secure and safe method for voting to you? The man says it's set up on an older infrastructure. This seems like a problem in Philadelphia. This is the first year any Pennsylvanian voter can vote by mail, and election law now also requires counties to provide mail-in ballots on demand to voters who request them in person. That allows for a kind of in-person early voting. And the state has encouraged counties to open up satellite offices to make it easier to vote early. Mayor Jim Kenney, and this is a statement he made before Trump called them out on the stage. Mayor Jim Kenney said that the new voting locations would be important for residents who have health conditions and cannot access the internet to apply for a mail ballot. He expressed confidence the early technical issues would be sorted out. But here's where it gets interesting, because they've created this whole new system of voting. They've put it on older infrastructure. They're not allowing any citizens in to observe it. They're clearly polling stations where people go to vote, but they won't call them voting stations. What makes it a polling station is when you go in person to vote, and they're not calling it an in-person vote. They're calling it mail-in voting without the mail. Sketchy. Omar Sabir, another city commissioner, said that the elections office's budget only allowed for limited communication to the public about the satellite offices. He said he wishes the office had the funding to run ads on TVs, buses, and billboards, which could have helped clear up confusion. But, quote, "We never had the appropriate resources in regards with communication." Priscilla Bennett of North Philadelphia cast the first mail-in vote at the Liacouras Center with city election officials. In a matter of minutes, Bennett submitted an application for a mail-in ballot, had it processed and printed by election workers, and then filled out and submitted her vote. And yet this isn't a polling station, and this cannot be observed. And it says, this is not like Election Day, one worker repeated to voters. Many people who had already requested mail-in ballots but had not yet received them also arrived assuming they could get a ballot and vote, but they were turned away and told to wait for their ballot to arrive or return next Tuesday if it had not come by then. Well, if they come back and they say it didn't show up by next Tuesday, does that mean you're giving them a ballot? So all I have to do is go in there and say, I set up a mail-in ballot, but it didn't come here, and you're going to tell me, we'll go sit for a week and come back, and if you don't have it then, we'll give you one? Is it that easy to vote twice? Is it really just that? And if it's not enough that these satellite centers are seeming sketchy as hell, this came out yesterday. Philadelphia voting machine controls stolen from city warehouse. Philadelphia authorities are investigating and re-examining their voting machines after USB drives used to program them were stolen from a city warehouse, according to local reports. The thumb drives and laptop went missing sometime this week, but exactly when remains unclear, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported Wednesday. Interesting. We are confident that this incident will not in any way compromise the integrity of the election, a spokesman for the city commissioner, Lisa Deely, said. So, how are they confident that it's not going to affect the election? It was a laptop and thumb drives that are used to download the digital votes off the voting machines and collect them. How is that? How do they know for a fact that that's not going to happen? If you're some kind of spook that's looking to do dirt on these elections, you're going to need that equipment. And isn't it funny that it goes missing just now? Spokesperson said this on Wednesday. And Trump was talking about the dirty things going down in Philly during the debates. These thumb drives and laptops were evidently stolen last week. Deely's office also said that once set up, voting machines are sealed, so authorities were re-examining them to see if they had been tampered with. And because we don't know the nature of the system, we don't even know what that means, that they were re-examining them. You could recode all of these things using the laptop and the thumb drives. But the paper also reported that the city commissioners had been reluctant to confirm the thefts and privately worried that the thefts could lend credence to claims of threats to election integrity. So they're hiding it because they're worried that it will be perceived as a threat to election integrity, but the spokesperson says, oh, it's absolutely not a problem with election integrity. The voting machines manufacturer, Election Systems and Software, said the USB drivers are encrypted and have multiple levels of security, CBS Philly reported. Each of the drives is matched to a single voting machine according to the Inquirer, and inserting the wrong device will result in an error. Any machines at risk of having been tampered with would be wiped, cleaned, and retested. And this is kind of true, but kind of not true, because there's also a master drive, and you can go and you can get into any machine using that master drive. I know this because there was a problem in 2008 where some votes didn't get counted. I don't remember where, but it was because, like they said, one thumb drive assigned to each voting machine, and you pull the votes off of the machine with that thumb drive. But if the person that has the master drive does it, then you lose those votes if you don't use the master drive on all of the machines. Something to that effect. The point is, because of the in and out of the thumb drives, they lost some votes, and they say that they fixed the situation. But I guarantee you there's still master thumb drives because they have to have those. The company also blocked network access to the stolen laptop and changed the owner's passwords. ES&S is confident that this incident will not in any way compromise the integrity of the election. And I wish I could tell you that this was only in Philadelphia, but it's not. In Georgia, lawyers spar over Georgia voting machine glitch, planned fix. Georgia election officials say they are implementing a software change to fix a glitch in the state's new voting machines, but election integrity activists say the state is downplaying the problem and putting the security of the upcoming election at risk. During pre-election testing on the new touchscreen voting machines last week, election officials in 2 counties discovered a problem with the display for the high-profile 21-candidate U.S. Senate race. Under certain circumstances, not all of the candidates' names would fit on a single screen. Election officials initially thought they would have to rebuild the database, but then but then discovered they could fix the problem through a software change. Lawyers representing election integrity activists told the U.S. District Judge Amy Totenberg this problem and others bolster their arguments that the voting machines are not secure and aren't ready for use. Totenberg is presiding over a lawsuit that challenges the constitutionality of the state's brand new voting machines, and she's expected to rule soon. Requests that the state be ordered to ditch its new voting machines and use hand-marked paper ballots for the November general election. Totenberg held a 3-day hearing on the requests earlier this month and said she had planned to issue a ruling Monday until the activists raised the database error in a filing late Friday. Instead, she held an emergency hearing on Monday. Tyson repeatedly called the problem a very minor issue and told the judge the activists have jumped to conclusions not fully understanding what is happening, and they are trying to make a mountain out of what is really a molehill that is not really a big deal as they are alleging. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like what the spokesman from Philly was saying? The fact that the issue was discovered during pre-election testing shows that the system worked the way it was supposed to, Tyson argued. Coomer, an executive with Dominion Voting Systems, which sold the state its electronic system last year for more than $100 million, said the problem has to do with the way the voting machines communicate with the underlying Android operating system. He told Totenberg a minor software change will address the issue. So it has an Android operating system. The new software will have to be tested and approved by a third-party vendor, and then state election officials will have to load it onto 159 USB drives to be delivered to the counties. The activists said in a court filing, county election officials will then have to install the software on hundreds of voting machines, reprogram the machines, and then do pre-election testing, the filing says. At least some of the machines will have to be ready in about 2 weeks when in-person early voting begins October 12th. I mean, this is a mountain. It's not a molehill. David Cross, a lawyer representing several of the voters who filed the lawsuit, told Totenberg during Monday's hearing. He questioned whether the state would get federal certification for the change and what security measures would be taken throughout the process. In a written declaration filed by the activists, J. Alex Halderman, a University of Michigan professor and a leading expert on election security, said, in complex computerized systems like Georgia's election equipment, last-minute changes, even seemingly small ones, can introduce serious and difficult-to-foresee consequences. Yeah. A change now would not leave enough time for rigorous testing and security measures and would provide an attractive vector for attackers seeking to spread malware. During the previous hearing earlier this month, the state's lawyers repeatedly said it was too late to make big changes, that the election was effectively underway. Cross seized on that, arguing that replacing the software on some 34,000 machines is a much bigger change than switching to hand-marked paper ballots. Tyson accused the activists of engaging in a, quote, disinformation campaign about Georgia elections, prompting angry responses from Cross and Bruce Brown, an attorney representing the Coalition for Good Governance and individual voters. You guys, we all saw what happened with the app that they tried to use at the DNC caucuses, the Iowa caucuses. That was a complete mess. The election hasn't even started yet. Totenberg asked questions throughout the hearing and, once it was over, ordered the state to submit additional documentation about testing of the modified software and any documentation filed for federal certification. So while I'm hearing about a handful of ballots in the trash and a handful of ballots in the grass, I'm not hearing anyone talking about this. These situations with software, these digital weaknesses, this is where massive amounts of voter fraud can be implemented in just a click of a button, just the insertion of a thumb drive. We saw what they're doing on Project Veritas, right? Where she has a ground game going, and she's got a bunch of people going out there forcing people to sign up for a mail-in ballot and then showing back up and either paying for it or taking it. And then they take it and they bring it in. That is a ground game, but that is a very analog way to cheat in an election. And many of these voting machines are, of course, digital. When you move from analog to digital, even in theft or fraud, it jumps up exponentially. And there's no hack-proof machine. There's no such thing as that. So it's always been a problem with me. And it makes me really wonder why we have this major thing going on where they're going to reprogram all of the voting machines in Georgia at the last minute before the election, where the electronics that can reset and tabulate the votes on machines were stolen from Philadelphia, and they didn't want to release that information. this crazy satellite election offices system that Philadelphia has set up and used a legitimate technicality to prevent people from coming and observing it. These are all major problems. And we know that in the tip report, they're counting on this. And it's already starting. I want to feel like our elections are secure. Right now, I'm reading these articles. I don't feel that way. But I haven't felt that way. So there's that. I made an episode a while back about the South Korean elections. There were allegations all over about China was creating ballots in South Korea, and they were doing it with thumb drives, with these electronic voting counting machines, and they were doing it with insecure security tape. And I covered all of that. And the question I was asking is this a prelude to what we have going on here in November? And it's starting to look like that it might be. And just so you know, the South Korean election, it was a mess. We find ourselves in a situation where no matter who the politician is, they're basically all telling us that it's about to be a mess. And I've talked a bunch of times on my channel about what to do whenever everybody in Washington agrees on something. It deserves further scrutiny. So I'll be keeping an eye on this stuff. I will be the first to report it if I see it. Like, share, sub the channel. All right, y'all.